Expiration date, not the best way to go, let's be honest. I mean, who wants to be found face down on a dusty carpet, a half eaten can of tuna next to them? Not exactly the glamorous exit I'd envisioned, but hey, life, or rather the lack thereof, rarely goes according to plan. It all started with Adrien, of course, my dear, darling, utterly despicable husband, Adrien Sinclair, the man I'd practically carried on my back for years, the man whose dreams I'd funded with my inheritance, the man whose every insecurity I'd soothed with unwavering support. And what was my reward? Oh, the classic neglect, disrespect, and a rather blatant obsession with a mistress who could probably make a decent living as a human coat hanger. The flashbacks hit me, of course, as I lay there, my vision blurring, my stomach gnawing at itself like a hungry dog. There was Adrien, back in the day, all wide-eyed and ambitious, charming my socks off with promises of a future filled with love, success, and let's just say he was a bit vague on the details. I was smitten, obviously. Who wouldn't be? He had that whole lost puppy thing going on, and I, being the ever-reliable Saint Celeste, couldn't resist the urge to rescue him. Fast forward a few years, and there we were, living the dream. His dream, that is, the sprawling mansion, the fancy cars, the whole 9 yards of wealth and extravagance that my inheritance had, let's be honest, funded. And me? Oh, I was the dutiful wife, the smiling hostess, the invisible woman behind the successful man. Except it wasn't exactly a partnership, was it? More like a parasitic relationship. He thrived, I withered. He indulged, I scrimped. He basically forgot I existed unless he needed a clean shirt or someone to pick up his dry cleaning. And then there was Isabella, of course, the mistress, the human embodiment of expensive taste and questionable morals. Adrien showered her with gifts, vacations, and let's just say she probably had a whole room dedicated to designer handbags. Meanwhile, I was counting pennies, trying to stretch the grocery budget, and let's just say my wardrobe wasn't exactly turning heads at the charity galas. The irony wasn't lost on me, of course. I'd built him up, made him the man he was, and he'd repaid me by basically starving me out. Not literally, of course, at least not at first. But the emotional starvation, the neglect, the complete disregard for my needs, my wants, my very existence, was just as effective. I remember the day he locked me out of our joint accounts. "You don't need money, Celeste," he'd said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You have everything you could possibly want. Everything except, basic human decency and a husband who didn't treat me like a piece of furniture he'd grown tired of." The hunger pangs started subtly, then grew more insistent, a constant gnawing reminder of my rather pathetic situation. I tried to eat, of course. The pantry was stocked, the fridge was full, but let's just say accessing them required a level of, let's just say it wasn't exactly a walk in the park. And so I withered. Literally. The weight fell off, the energy drained, the light in my eyes that Adrien had once claimed to adore flickered and eventually died out. The collapse was, let's just say it wasn't exactly dramatic, more like a slow fade, a gradual descent into oblivion. One minute I was standing, the next I was, let's just say the carpet wasn't exactly the softest landing spot. And as I lay there, my vision blurring, my breath coming in ragged gasps, I couldn't help but think, well, this is just great. Not only did I waste my life on that, but I'm going to die with an empty stomach. Talk about adding insult to injury. But then something unexpected happened. Something that, let's just say, it wasn't exactly in the Dying of Neglect handbook. I woke up. Not exactly the pearly gates and harp music I'd been half expecting. More like my own damn bed. Lavender sheets, the faint scent of my ridiculously overpriced perfume, the general ambience of expensive but utterly joyless. Deja vu, anyone? I blinked, trying to clear the fog in my brain. It felt like I'd been dragged through a hedge, backwards, then left to dry in the sun. My body ached. My head pounded, and I was pretty sure my stomach was trying to eat itself from the inside out. Hunger pangs, a delightful reminder of my recent, let's just say, nutritional deficiency, was putting it mildly. I glanced around the room, taking in the familiar decor, the antique dresser, the ridiculously ornate mirror, the overall aesthetic of Adrien's good taste, funded by my money. And then it hit me, the date, 3 years ago. 3 years before the expiration date incident. 3 years before I became intimately acquainted with the joys of starvation. Well, that's unexpected. Not exactly complaining, mind you. I mean, Who wouldn't want a do-over? A chance to rewrite the ending, to maybe avoid the whole face down on the carpet scenario? A slow smile spread across my face. Irony, delicious, delicious irony. I'd been given a second chance. A chance to just say make some changes seems appropriate. The despair that had been my constant companion, the crushing weight of betrayal and neglect started to dissipate. Like a bad smell you finally realize you've gotten used to, then suddenly it's gone. And you're left with a rather refreshing sense of clarity. So, Adrien, my dear, darling, utterly clueless husband. He was in for a surprise, a big one. He thought he'd broken me, that he'd reduced me to a shadow of my former self. He thought I was weak, dependent, and basically too stupid to know what he was up to. He was wrong, of course, so very deliciously wrong. I swung my legs out of bed, the cool floor a welcome sensation against my overheated skin. I stood, stretching my aching muscles, a new sense of a rather delicious sense of purpose filling me. This wasn't just a second chance. It was an opportunity, a chance to, let's just say, even the score seems appropriate. And as I looked at my reflection in the ornate mirror, I couldn't help but grin. The woman staring back at me was different, stronger, wiser, and definitely a lot more, let's just say, motivated than she'd been before. Game on, Adrien, I whispered to my reflection, a hint of a rather delicious hint of malice in my voice. Game on. Adrien, bless his clueless heart, was none the wiser. He came home that evening, expecting the usual. A demure smile, a warm greeting, and a general air of wifely adoration that had, let's be honest, become somewhat strained in recent years. Celeste, darling, he'd boom, sweeping in like he owned the place, which technically he did, thanks to my generosity. How was your day? Oh, you know, the usual, I'd reply, my smile as sweet as the poisoned apple I was planning to serve him later. Lunch with the girls, a bit of shopping, the general routine of a kept woman. He'd nod, oblivious, his mind already probably on Isabel land, whatever ridiculously expensive piece of jewelry he was planning to buy her next. I'd watch him, amused, my internal monologue running a commentary that would have made a stand-up comedian proud. Yes, Adrien, darling, I'd think, my smile widening. Just your average, everyday, utterly miserable housewife. Nothing to see here. Move along. But behind the scenes, the wheels were turning. I was a woman on a mission, a one-woman army with a rather extensive to-do list. First, the finances. I'd been a fool to trust Adrien with our money, to let him control the purse strings, to basically hand him the keys to the kingdom. Not this time. I started subtly, siphoning off funds, creating secret accounts, investing in things that Adrien, with his limited financial acumen, wouldn't understand. Oh, Adrien, darling, I'd say, batting my eyelashes innocently. I was just thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful to have a little nest egg for a rainy day? You know, just in case. He'd wave me off, of course, dismissing my concerns with a chuckle. Don't you worry your pretty little head about money, Celeste, he'd say, his voice dripping with condescension. That's what I'm here for. Oh, right, because that had worked out so well for me last time. Next, the allies. I needed people on my side, people who could just say, provide a helping hand when the time came. I started networking, attending charity events, charming the pants off, not literally, but you get the idea. I built connections, cultivated relationships, and basically created a support system that Adrien, with his limited social skills, could only dream of. Oh, Adrien, darling, I'd say, my voice as smooth as silk. I met the most fascinating woman today. She's a lawyer, specializes in things like divorce and asset division. He'd shrug, unconcerned. That's nice, dear, he'd mumble, his attention already back on his phone, probably checking Isabella's latest Instagram post. And finally, the identity. I needed a clean break, a fresh start, a way to disappear when the time came. I created a new identity, a new persona, a whole new me, complete with a fake passport, a secret bank account, and a rather impressive collection of wigs and disguises. Oh, Adrien, darling, I'd say, my voice a little too bright, a little too enthusiastic. I'm thinking of taking a little trip. Just me, myself, and a whole new identity. He'd barely look up from his newspaper. That's fine, dear, he'd grunt. Just don't spend too much money. Right. because that was my biggest concern. The masquerade was on. The game was afoot. And I, Celeste Sinclair, the discarded wife, the neglected woman, the one he thought he'd broken, was about to become, let's just say he was in for a rather rude awakening. I started subtly, of course, casual lunches, shared spa days, the usual trappings of ladies who lunch. Isabella, ever eager to flaunt her relationship with Adrien, lapped it up, oblivious to the rather sharp claws I was carefully concealing beneath my perfectly manicured nails. "Oh, Celeste, darling," she'd purr, twirling a strand of her expensively highlighted hair. "Adrien is just so generous. He bought me this necklace. It's priceless." "Is it?" I'd reply, my smile as sweet as the arsenic I was mentally adding to her champagne. "It's lovely, though I've noticed Adrien's taste has become rather eclectic lately." I'd pause, letting the implication hang in the air, then add, almost casually, "You know, Adrien's family, they're old money. Like, really old. Sometimes I wonder if he's being entirely forthcoming about his actual financial situation." Isabella's eyes would narrow, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. The seed was planted. I continued the subtle campaign of misinformation, of course. Whispers about Adrien's business dealings, hints about unexpected expenses, the kind of things that could make even the most trusting mistress a little nervous. "Adrien's been working so late lately," I'd say, my voice laced with concern. "He's been so stressed. I'm worried about him. And sometimes I overhear him on the phone talking about things I don't quite understand, but it sounds complicated." Isabella would fidget, her perfectly applied makeup cracking slightly under the weight of her growing unease. She wasn't stupid, not entirely. She knew Adrien was, let's just say he wasn't exactly a saint. And the thought that he might be less wealthy than she'd assumed was a rather terrifying prospect. I'd play on her insecurities, of course, her vanity, her greed, her utter lack of loyalty. I'd suggest that Adrien was keeping secrets from her, that he wasn't being entirely honest about his real wealth. "You deserve to be treated like a queen, Isabella," I'd say, my voice soft, my tone persuasive. "And Adrien should be providing you with the lifestyle you deserve." "Shouldn't he?" Isabella would nod, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of greed and resentment. The seed of distrust was growing, taking root, and it was only a matter of time before it blossomed into, let's just say it wasn't going to be a bouquet of roses. And as I watched Isabella's, I saw doubt creeping into her eyes. As I felt the subtle shift in her demeanor, I couldn't help but smile. My plan was working. My little pawn was playing her part perfectly. And Adrien was about to learn that hell hath no fury, like a woman scorned and a mistress who suspects she's being played for a fool. Okay, so the first domino? It wasn't a gentle nudge, not a subtle push, more like a swift kick to the shins. Isabella, bless her impulsive little heart, was about to set off a chain reaction that would leave Adrien reeling. I'd been patient, of course, nurturing those seeds of doubt, watching them grow, waiting for the right moment to strike. And that moment came, as it often does, with a hefty dose of, let's just say, Isabella's greed wasn't exactly known for its subtlety. It started with a rumor, a whisper in the right ear, a carefully planted story about Adrien's secret investments. Nothing concrete, just enough to pique Isabella's interest, to make her wonder if Adrien was hiding something from her. "Did you hear?" I'd say to a mutual acquaintance, my voice lowered conspiratorially, knowing full well Isabella was within earshot. "Apparently, Adrien's been investing in some rather risky ventures lately. Offshore accounts, shell companies, the kind of things that make you wonder if he's being entirely transparent." Isabella, her ears practically twitching with curiosity, couldn't resist, of course. She confronted Adrien, her voice a shrill mix of accusation and insecurity. "What are you hiding from me, Adrien?" she'd shriek, her carefully manicured nails digging into his expensive suit. "What are these risky ventures Celeste was talking about? Are you broke?" Adrien, caught off guard, stammered a denial, but the damage was done. The seed of doubt had blossomed into full-blown suspicion, and Isabella, never one to be, let's just say, patient wasn't exactly her middle name, decided to take matters into her own hands. She started snooping, of course, going through his files, hacking into his accounts, the kind of things that a woman with too much time and too little common sense does when she suspects she's being played for a fool. And she found things, of course. Not exactly the smoking gun, but enough to confirm her suspicions, to fuel her anger, to basically push her over the edge. She confronted him again, this time armed with evidence, her voice a mix of fury and a rather impressive amount of entitlement. "You lied to me!" she screamed, throwing a ridiculously expensive vase at his head, which, thankfully, he dodged. "You're not as rich as you pretend to be. You've been cheap with me." Adrien, his carefully constructed facade crumbling, tried to defend himself, but Isabella wasn't listening. She was done. Finished. Over it. She stormed out, of course, taking with her a rather impressive collection of designer handbags, jewelry, and let's just say Adrien's credit card bill was about to give him a heart attack. But that was just the beginning. Isabella, in her fury, decided to just say she wasn't exactly going to go quietly. She leaked information to the press, she gossiped to her socialite friends. She basically did everything she could to tarnish Adrien's reputation, to expose his secrets, to make him pay for his, let's just say, his financial indiscretions. The first cracks appeared in Adrien's carefully constructed world. His business partners started to distance themselves. His investors started asking questions. His carefully cultivated image of success started to look a little less polished. And I watched, of course, from a safe distance, a smug smile playing on my lips, my internal monologue providing a running commentary that would have made a reality TV producer proud. "Oh, Adrien, darling," I'd think, my smile widening. "Looks like your little investment isn't paying off quite the way you'd hoped, is it?" The first domino had fallen, and the chain reaction was just getting started. Okay, so the sabotage. Not exactly subtle, not exactly covert, more like a slow, deliberate dismantling. A strategic erosion of Adrien's empire, brick by overpriced brick. I'd done my homework, of course. Adrien, bless his arrogant heart, had underestimated me. He'd assumed I was just a pretty face, a trophy wife, a clueless bimbo who wouldn't know a balance sheet from a designer handbag. He was wrong, of course, dead wrong. I knew his business inside and out, the deals, the investments, the dirty little secrets he thought he'd hidden so well. And now, armed with that knowledge and a rather impressive amount of resentment, I was ready to, let's just say, return the favor seems appropriate. I started with the deals, of course, the big ones, the ones that kept his company afloat, the ones he was so proud of. I'd leak information to his competitors, anonymous tips, confidential documents, the kind of stuff that could make or break a deal. "Oh, Adrien, darling," I'd think, my smile widening as I hit send on another anonymous email. "Looks like that merger isn't going quite as smoothly as you'd hoped, is it?" Then the investments. Adrien, with his insatiable greed, had a penchant for, let's just say, high risk, high reward was putting it mildly. I'd subtly steer him towards disastrous ventures, whispering words of encouragement, feeding his ego, the kind of manipulation that a seasoned con artist would be proud of. "Adrien, darling," I'd purr, my voice as smooth as silk. "I have a feeling about this one. It's a game changer. You're going to be so rich." And he'd fall for it, of course, hook, line, and sinker. He was so blinded by his own ambition, his own greed, that he couldn't see the rather obvious trap I was setting for him. And finally, the investors. Adrien's biggest weakness, his Achilles heel, the people who held the purse strings, the ones who could make or break his empire. I'd cultivate relationships with them, charm them, gain their trust, and then I'd subtly plant seeds of doubt, whispers of concern, the kind of things that could make even the most loyal investor a little nervous. "Oh, Adrien, darling," I'd say to one of his biggest investors, my voice laced with concern. "I'm so worried about you. You've been working so hard lately. And those investments, are you sure they're wise?" They'd listen, of course. They weren't fools. They saw the cracks in Adrien's facade, the signs that his empire was starting to crumble. And one by one, they'd start to, let's just say, they weren't exactly lining up to throw more money at him. And as I watched, as I orchestrated the slow, deliberate downfall of Adrien Sinclair, I couldn't help but feel a sense of, let's just say it wasn't exactly remorse. It was something more, something colder, Something that felt a lot like satisfaction. He'd underestimated me. He'd betrayed me. He'd basically left me to die. And now I was returning the favor. Slowly, deliberately, and with a rather delicious sense of, let's just say it wasn't exactly sympathy. Okay, so the unexpected ally. Not a knight in shining armor, not a prince charming. More like a wolf in a bespoke suit. Liam Thorne, CEO of Thorne Industries, a man who radiated power, intelligence, and let's just say he wasn't exactly hard on the eyes either. We met at a charity gala, of course, the kind where everyone pretends to care about the cause while secretly sizing each other up, looking for opportunities, for connections, for the next rung on the social ladder. I was there for, let's just say, reconnaissance seems appropriate. Adrien, bless his oblivious heart, had insisted I attend, probably hoping I'd snag him a new investor or two. Little did he know. Liam approached me, of course. He had that presence, the kind that commands attention, the kind that makes you want to know more. Celeste Sinclair, he'd said, his voice a low rumble that sent a shiver down my spine. Liam Thorne. I've heard things about you. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Oh? Intriguing things, he'd said, his eyes twinkling with a mix of amusement and something else. Something that made my heart skip a beat. Something that definitely wasn't boredom. We talked, of course, not about the usual socialite drivel, not about Adrien's latest business venture, but about things that mattered. Ideas, ambitions, the kind of things that made my brain spark and let's just say my pulse quickened a bit. He was different from Adrien, of course. Liam listened, he engaged. He actually seemed interested in what I had to say. He didn't interrupt, he didn't condescend, he didn't treat me like a decorative object. He saw me, the real me, the one buried beneath the layers of trophy wife and neglected spouse. He saw the intelligence, the strength, the potential that Adrien had so carelessly overlooked. And he challenged me, of course. He pushed me to think, to question, to basically step out of the gilded cage I'd been living in, and then spread my wings a bit. You're wasted on him, Celeste, he'd said, his voice low, his gaze intense. You're capable of so much more. And I knew he was right, of course. I'd known it for years, but fear, insecurity, and a rather unhealthy dose of self-doubt had kept me trapped. But not anymore. Liam, with his quiet strength, his unwavering support, his genuine interest in me, was a breath of fresh air, a crack in the gilded cage, a possibility that I hadn't dared to dream of. And as I looked at him, as I felt the connection between us, as I realized that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than Adrien and his rather limited worldview, I couldn't help but feel a surge of, let's just say it wasn't exactly gratitude for my husband's neglect. It was something more, something hopeful, something that felt a lot like freedom. Not exactly a fairy tale transformation, not a sudden glow-up, more like a shedding of skin. The old Celeste, the timid, insecure, ever-accommodating wife, was gone, vanished. Replaced by, let's just say, force of nature is a pretty accurate description. It started subtly, of course. A raised eyebrow here, a pointed question there, the kind of assertiveness that would have made the old Celeste faint with anxiety. But this new Celeste, she thrived on it. Adrien, darling, I'd say, my voice deceptively sweet. I was thinking perhaps it's time I had a bit more say in our finances. Just to keep things interesting. He'd scoff, of course, but I could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He wasn't used to this Celeste, the one who didn't back down, the one who clearly wasn't going to be placated with a new handbag. The confidence grew with each small victory, the successful investments, the strategic alliances, the growing realization that I was good at this, that I had a knack for the game, that maybe I didn't need Adrien after all. I started dressing differently, of course. The demure pastels and sensible shoes were replaced by bold colors, sharp lines, and let's just say my heels got a lot higher. I walked taller, spoke louder, and basically took up space in a way that would have made the old Celeste shrink into the background. Celeste, darling, Adrien would say, his voice laced with a hint of, was that fear? What's gotten into you? Oh, just finding myself, darling, I'd reply, my smile as sharp as a diamond. And, realizing my own potential. The transformation wasn't just external, of course. It was a shift in my mindset, a complete overhaul of my self-worth. I was no longer the timid, insecure woman who'd let Adrien walk all over her. I was a force to be reckoned with. And as I watched Adrien, as I saw the confusion, the uncertainty, the dawning realization that he was losing control, I couldn't help but feel a surge of, let's just say it wasn't exactly sympathy. It was something more, something exhilarating, something that felt a lot like power. The rise was complete. The doormat had become a force of nature, and Adrien was about to be swept away. Adrien, bless his oblivious heart, was finally catching on. But, as they say, hindsight is 20/20ths, and in Adrien's case, it was about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. It started with the whispers, of course, the gossip swirling through his social circles, the rumors about Isabelle and her, let's just say, her extracurricular activities weren't exactly a secret anymore. Adrien, initially dismissive, brushed it off as mere jealousy, the petty sniping of those who envied his success, his wealth, his ability to attract a woman like Isabella. But the whispers persisted, growing louder, more insistent, until they became a deafening roar that he could no longer ignore. His friends, those loyal companions who'd always been so eager to sing his praises, now looked at him with pity, with a thinly veiled amusement that made his blood run cold. "Adrien, old boy," one of them had said, clapping him on the shoulder with a little too much force. "You know what they say about those who live in glass houses, don't you?" Adrien, his face pale, his smile strained, had mumbled something about malicious gossip and jealous rivals, but the seed of doubt had been planted. He started watching Isabella, his eyes narrowed, his suspicion growing with each passing day. He noticed the late-night phone calls, of course, the hushed conversations, the furtive glances, the general air of secrecy that surrounded her like a cheap perfume. He questioned her, of course, but Isabella, master of deception, or more accurately, a lucky amateur, deflected his inquiries with practiced ease. "Oh, Adrien, darling," she'd purr, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. "It's just business. You know how it is." But Adrien wasn't convinced. He started following her, hiring private investigators, the kind of desperate measures that a man takes when he suspects his carefully constructed world is about to, let's just say, implode seems appropriate. And he found things, of course, not exactly a smoking gun, but enough to confirm his worst fears. The secret meetings, the lavish gifts, the undeniable evidence that Isabella was, let's just say she wasn't exactly spending her evenings knitting blankets for orphans. The realization hit him like a runaway train. Isabella, the woman he'd showered with affection, with gifts, with my money, was betraying him. She was using him, she was lying to him, she was basically laughing at him behind his back. The anger was, let's just say, it wasn't exactly a calm and measured response. He raged, he stormed, he basically threw a tantrum that would have made a toddler proud. He confronted Isabella, of course. The accusations flew, the insults were hurled. The vase that had narrowly missed his head a few weeks earlier was now, let's just say, it wasn't exactly in one piece anymore. Isabella, cornered, didn't even try to deny it. She laughed, a cold, cruel sound that cut Adrien to the core. "Oh, Adrien, darling," she'd said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You really thought I was in this for you? Please, I'm in this for the perks, and you're just not providing them anymore." Adrien, his face pale, his eyes filled with a mix of rage and a rather pathetic amount of self-pity, finally understood. He'd been played. He'd been used. He'd been a fool. And as he watched Isabella walk away, her designer heels clicking on the marble floor, her laughter echoing through the empty mansion, he realized something else, something far more terrifying than Isabella's betrayal. He was losing control. His business was faltering, his mistress was gone, his carefully constructed world was crumbling around him, and he had no idea how to stop it. The desperation set in, a cold, gnawing fear that maybe, just maybe, he'd made a mistake. A big one. A mistake that was about to cost him everything. Okay, so the fall. Not a gentle descent, not a gradual decline, more like a plummet. A catastrophic freefall, a complete and utter implosion. Adrien, reeling from Isabella's betrayal, his ego bruised, his pride shattered, was now facing a far greater threat. His business, the empire he'd built on, let's just say, shaky foundations seems appropriate, was crumbling around him. The investors, those fickle creatures who'd once been so eager to throw money at him, they were running for the hills. The whispers about his financial irregularities had become a roar. The rumors about his risky ventures were now front-page news. Adrien, old boy, one of his biggest investors had said, his voice dripping with condescension, I'm afraid we're going to have to divest. Your recent performance has been disappointing. Disappointing, a rather polite way of saying, you've screwed up royally. Adrien tried to plead, to beg, to basically grovel for their continued support. But it was no use. They'd lost faith in him. They'd lost confidence in his leadership. They'd lost their appetite for throwing good money after bad. And as the investors pulled out, one by one, Adrien's carefully constructed financial house of cards began to wobble precariously. Then came the investigations, of course. The authorities, armed with subpoenas and search warrants, descended upon his offices like a swarm of locusts. They were looking for evidence, for proof of his, let's just say, creative accounting practices. Adrien, panicking, tried to cover his tracks, to destroy evidence, to basically play a game of cat and mouse with the law. But it was too late. They were onto him. They were closing in. They were about to expose him for the fraud he was. The media, sensing blood in the water, went into a frenzy. The headlines screamed about his financial crimes, his insider trading, his general lack of moral fiber. The public, who'd once admired him, now turned against him, their fickle loyalty replaced by a healthy dose of schadenfreude. Adrien Grayson, from high flyer to fallen angel, the headlines proclaimed, financial fraud, insider trading. Is this the end of Adrien Grayson? The pressure mounted. The investigations intensified. The walls were closing in on him. His lawyers, those expensive suits who'd once been so eager to take his money, now looked at him with, let's just say it wasn't exactly admiration. Mr. Grayson, one of them had said, his voice grim, the evidence is compelling. I'm afraid your options are limited. Limited. A rather polite way of saying you're screwed. Adrien, his face pale, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and desperation, finally understood. He was losing everything, his business, his reputation, his freedom. The final blow came swiftly, decisively, ruthlessly. The authorities, having gathered enough evidence, moved in. They raided his offices, they seized his assets, and arrested him. He was out, his empire crumbling, his fortune vanishing, his carefully constructed world reduced to rubble. And as he was led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of humiliation and despair, he finally understood the true cost of his greed, his arrogance, his betrayal. He'd lost, completely, utterly. And as he faced the consequences of his actions, he knew that he'd never recover. His fall was complete, his ruin was absolute. Adrien, stripped of his wealth, his power, his carefully crafted facade, was now a shadow of his former self. The arrogance that had once been his trademark was gone, replaced by a rather pathetic desperation that was almost amusing to watch. He'd tracked me down, of course, after the dust settled, after the authorities had finished picking over the carcass of his empire, after he'd been released on bail, a broken man with nothing left to lose. He found me at my new office, of course, the one with the panoramic view, the one that screamed success, the one that was a far cry from the gilded cage he'd kept me in. Celeste, he'd croaked, his voice hoarse, his eyes pleading. We need to talk. I looked at him, my expression unreadable, my internal monologue running a commentary that would have made a stand-up comedian proud. Oh, Adrien, darling, I thought, my lips curving into a slow, sardonic smile. To what do I owe the pleasure? He launched into a desperate plea, of course, blaming Isabella, blaming his business partners, blaming everyone but himself. He begged for forgiveness, for another chance, for a way out of the mess he'd created. I was a fool, Celeste, he'd said, his voice cracking with a mix of regret, and let's just say it wasn't exactly genuine remorse. I didn't appreciate you. I took you for granted. I let him ramble, of course. It was entertaining, in a rather macabre way, watching him squirm, seeing his desperation, his complete and utter humiliation, was a rather satisfying form of payback. When he finally finished, his voice trailing off into a pathetic whimper, I leaned back in my chair, my smile widening. "You're right, Adrien," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "You were a fool. You threw away a diamond to chase after a cheap imitation, and now you're paying the price." He tried to argue, to plead, to basically grovel at my feet, but I wasn't interested. I'd heard enough. I'd seen enough. I was done. "It's over, Adrien," I said, my voice firm, my tone final. "There's nothing left to say." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of disbelief, and was that a flicker of fear? He'd never seen the Celeste before, the one who wouldn't back down, the one who clearly wasn't going to be swayed by his pathetic pleas. But Celeste," he stammered, what about us?" I laughed, a cold, humorless sound that echoed through the office. "Us?" I said, my voice dripping with disdain. "There is no us, Adrien. There never was." And with that, I turned away, dismissing him, erasing him from my life, my thoughts, my future. He was a ghost, a shadow, a reminder of a past I was determined to leave behind. The confrontation was over, the rejection was complete, and Adrien was left to face the consequences of his actions, alone, defeated, and utterly irrelevant. Okay, so the farewell. Not a tearful goodbye, not a dramatic exit, more like a closing of a chapter, a clean break, a decisive step forward, a reclaiming of my own damn narrative. I walked away from Adrien, from his pleas, from his pathetic attempts to rewrite history, from the ghost of the man he used to be. He was no longer a threat, no longer a source of pain, no longer relevant to my life. He was a footnote, a lesson learned, a reminder of what I didn't want in my future. I walked away from the past, from the years of neglect, the emotional starvation, the slow erosion of my self-worth. It was a weight lifted, a burden shed, a freeing sensation that I hadn't realized I was craving so desperately. I walked away from the old Celeste, the timid, insecure, ever-accommodating wife. She was gone, vanished, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, more capable of handling whatever life threw my way. The journey had been, let's just say it wasn't exactly a walk in the park. There had been pain, betrayal, and moments of doubt that had threatened to derail me. But I'd persevered, I'd learned, I'd grown, and I'd emerged from the fire stronger, more resilient, and more me than I'd ever been before. The triumph wasn't just about taking down Adrien, about reclaiming my fortune, about getting my revenge. It was about something more, something deeper, something that felt a lot like self-discovery. I discovered my strength, my resilience, my capacity for both ruthlessness and, let's just say, a carefully guarded empathy. I'd learned that I didn't need Adrien, that I didn't need anyone to define me, to validate me, to make me whole. I was whole on my own. And as I walked away, as I stepped into the bright light of my new beginning, I felt a sense of, let's just say, it wasn't exactly relief. It was something more, something powerful, something that felt a lot like freedom. Liam was there, of course, waiting, not hovering, not pushing, just present. A quiet strength, a steady support, a potential that maybe I was finally ready to explore. He saw me, the real me, the woman I'd become, the force of nature I was now embracing, and that was intriguing. But that was a story for another day. For now, I was content to savor my victory, to bask in the glow of my own triumph, to simply be Celeste, strong, resilient, and finally, utterly, unapologetically free.